Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 25th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, we've got Vanessa Beeley from Damascus and Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, both. Vanessa, we're going to get started with you and the situation in Lebanon as Israel continues striking that country.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount going on, so it's difficult to cover all of it, but I've tried to provide basically an overview. So since Monday, Israel's expanded aggression. They're now targeting even the central mountain ranges of Lebanon above Byblos and the northeast, so no longer only in the south. 558 people have been killed, including 50 children, and well over 1,000 injured, and many, of course, still missing under the rubble of the homes that have been destroyed. Just a very quick video clip of a number of the airstrikes since Monday, just to show the ferocity.
هيدي الضربة ضربوا على ساحة الغازية عنا على العين.
Multiple displacements, of course, of tens of thousands of people. These are the queues heading from the south into the north, and even in Syria, we're receiving thousands of Syrian and Lebanese refugees, and the Minister of Health has opened all hospitals. The President has opened all governorates to receive the refugees. At the same time, Hezbollah is responding and also expanding the war deeper into the occupied territories. They've targeted, among other areas, the Ramat David Air Base, or the Etzel Weizmann Base, or Wing 1, which is the main base the Israeli occupation forces use for aerial operations in the northern direction towards Lebanon and Syria. It's also the only Israeli Air Force airbase in the northern occupied territories. The Megiddo aviation company, which was established by British occupation forces in 1941. In 2004, an Israeli government committee led by former Air Force Commander Bodinger decided to create a new airport at Megiddo in 2009. Renovation and expansion operations were carried out. And today, for the first time, Hezbollah used one of their ballistic missiles. They've been using generally their lower grade missiles until now, but they used a ballistic missile to target the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. And that, again, is the first time that Hezbollah has targeted Tel Aviv. Of course, Israel and the Israeli forces have been putting out messaging, declaring victory, declaring that they've destroyed the majority of Hezbollah missile launchers. But in reality, these are both from Al-Mayadeen, a former Israeli security advisor, says that Israel is not even close to beginning to destroy the capabilities of the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, and asking if Hezbollah has been defeated. An article or opinion piece today in Israeli media. Has it been defeated? Will it surrender? The answer is no. The IDF has also been producing its normal standard of propaganda to justify the slaughter of civilians. We have to remember that if it were Russia killing 558 civilians, almost all of those in one day, there would be outrage from the West. So here, the Israeli Defense Forces initially put out a tweet saying that the reason that they had destroyed all of these houses was that basically Hezbollah was storing and launching missiles from those houses. Later on, that post was deleted and it was rewritten to exclude the information about the missiles being stored in the houses. And of course, this isn't new. this is the standard argument from the IDF to justify targeting civilian properties in Gaza, in Palestine, and now, of course, in Lebanon and in Syria. Last night, to show that the escalation is also extending into Syria, the Syrian air defense, this is from Israeli media, was triggered amid alleged Israeli strike on the port city of Tartus. Now, what's interesting is that I'm being told by people here in the military that in reality it was an attack by drone from the Al-Qaeda factions to the north of Latakia on the coast and Idlib. So this, again, demonstrates how the so-called rebels support their Zionist funders, backers, armors, and supporters in Israel. And again, this is also quite interesting. This story has been repeated twice in the last 2 weeks. That's why I wanted to point it out. So yesterday, Haaretz published an article claiming that 40,000 militants had arrived at the border with the occupied Golan territories, which are, of course, Syrian territories occupied by Israel, from Yemen, Iraq, and from inside Syria. Now, I have to say this is nonsense. About 2 weeks ago, there was a story about Yemeni forces of similar numbers. I think it was 25,000 coming to the same area. And of course, this is virtually impossible, but it also hasn't happened. What I believe it is to frame a narrative. If we have a quick look at the map, it'll frame a narrative. If we look where the drone strike happened, so that was on the western coast of Lebanon, where I've put the red star is where they're claiming that these 40,000 strong forces have gathered. Israel, we know, has been clearing the mines that it had planted in order to prevent the Syrian army entering the occupied Golan, which suggests that there is potential of an Israeli ground of invasion. I think it's far more likely that there will be a bombardment on the basis of this narrative that Syria and the resistance axis are gathering forces at the border with the occupied territories. Now, there has also been a noticeable increase in C-17 flights departing from Fort Campbell, potentially indicating the activation of the 101st Airborne Division. According to US officials, this activity appears to be related to contingency planning for a possible evacuation of US personnel or civilians from Lebanon. But of course, we heard this a few months ago. If you remember, we actually reported on it. And at the same time, and actually interesting to note, the 101st Division were deployed, I think it was in November 2022, to Romania on the borders with Ukraine. And here again, you have confirmation from the BBC and from Disclosed TV that Starmer is telling Britons to leave Lebanon immediately and sending 700 troops. Again, this is a repeat of a story from a couple of months ago to Cyprus for possible Lebanon evacuation. There are not that many British and American civilians in Lebanon that need this level of evacuation support. So we have to speculate why those forces are there right now.
Thank you, Vanessa. Indeed. Now, coming on to the Ukraine side of things, well, Russia has been talking in the last day or two about the use of nuclear weapons, and so I'm going to start off here with the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov. He was talking about the potential testing of nuclear weapons a day or two ago, and he said nothing has changed as previously outlined by Russian President. We can conduct such tests, but we will not hold any so long as the United States refrains from such steps. So in other words, if the US maintains an embargo on nuclear testing, Russia will do the same. He went on to say that that there have been media reports recently about infrastructure upgrades to the Novaya Zemlya. This is the Russian main testing area, and but he wanted to make the point that this was also in response to steps on the part of Washington, which has been focused on upgrading the infrastructure they have at their disposal in this sphere in the past few years. So the Russians continuing to push the idea that they are responding, and I think this is true. If you look at the timeline of events, they are responding to the U.S. Developments in terms of their use of nuclear weapons and so on. But we were talking some months ago about the second failed attempt by the UK at testing their Trident nuclear capability. The test failed. Russia not immune from this themselves. So apparently they have had a nuclear test explosion, which has destroyed the facility that it was being tested from. Perhaps this feeds into the idea from certain Western leaders that the idea of using nuclear weapons in a restrained way, as they like to put it, i.e. tactical nuclear weapons, is not that risky because the Russians, they claim, don't have the infrastructure. I just make the point that while this story is doing the rounds, both the UK and the US have also had nuclear test failures in recent months. There is no better, nobody is leading the way on this in any shape or form. Now, the UK Column News was talking about the Summit of the Future on Monday. And of course, Zelensky was at that. He appeared to speak at the United Nations General Assembly and for the Summit of the Future. So he was very excited about that. But he then proceeded to run a tour of all the leaders that were there with his begging bowl in hand. I'll just show a few of these because it's quite funny. So here he is with Prime Minister of Japan. Then he went to have a look at Prime Minister Modi. Then he had a chat with some US congressmen and senators. He also spoke to the US energy companies because, of course, Ukraine really desperate this winter because Russia has been so effective at destroying its energy infrastructure. So they're looking for help to try to maintain some level of energy capability over the winter. Who else? He spoke at the Security Council. He met a whole bunch of other leaders as well, but he also went off to Scranton Army Ammunition Plant. And this is because he wanted to say thank you to this particular group of arms manufacturers for the 155 millimeter shells that they have sent, a couple of million, 3 million of those, in fact. So he was quite excited about that. But on the other thing to note on this was he's been making comments like, "I think we're closer to peace than we think," and I'm not quite sure how he comes to this conclusion. Perhaps he means that we're closer to peace than we think because Ukraine is closer to losing the war. We'll see how that develops. But in the meantime, David Lammy was also over at the United Nations, and he was extremely well. I think we should say this was a bit of a comedy show, but I do want to give a health warning to anybody that's watching this because it might make you feel physically ill. We'll discuss it a little bit afterwards. Sorry about that. That completely, we'll try that again.
But I say to the Russian representative on his phone as I speak, that I stand here also as a black man whose ancestors were taken in chains from Africa at the barrel of a gun to be enslaved, whose ancestors rose up and fought in a great rebellion of the enslaved. Imperialism, I know it when I see it, and I will call it out for what it is. In this week, when I'm here talking to other partners around the world about our shared futures and the future of the UN, Russia is trying to return us to a world of the past, a world of imperialism, a world of redrawing borders by force, a world without the UN Charter. We cannot allow this to happen. Ukraine's fight matters to all of us. The UK will remain Ukraine's staunchest supporter.
So Vanessa, I wanted to get your thoughts on this because, of course, you've been discussing imperialism for many, many years. You recognise imperialism What are your thoughts on whether Lamy recognises imperialism or not?
Well, you should look in the mirror. I mean, you know, this is when he's talking about enslaved people, and he's not mentioning Palestine, and he's not mentioning the global sanctions against the global South. I mean, there is so much you could say about this speech. It leaves you a little bit speechless, really. It's total projection.
Absolute projection. Yes, that's absolutely right. But he went on.
I also want to speak directly to the Kremlin and its representative here today. And Vladimir Putin, Russia sits on this council, but its actions tear up the UN Charter. Russia sits on this council, but over the weekend, we saw it put forward amendments designed to wreck the UN's future. Russia claims to stand for the global South, but it runs roughshod over international law. Vladimir Putin, when you fire missiles into Ukraine hospitals, we know who you are. When you send mercenaries into African countries, we know who you are. When you murder opponents in European cities, we know who you are. Your invasion is in your own interests, yours alone, to expand your mafia state into a mafia empire, an empire built on corruption.
I mean, the hypocrisy in this is staggering. Charles, I don't know if you've got any thoughts just before you introduce your segment.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good afternoon all. Like every other speech we've heard Lamy read out, I don't think he understands a word of it. Most obviously exemplified by him saying that he was standing when quite clearly he was actually sitting down. But no, I think to start talking about building empires on corruption is very apposite, because, of course, that is exactly where he is with his government as they set out on their campaign to completely demolish all the sense of sort of decorum and good sense in society in the United Kingdom today. But yes, we'll be hearing more from him in due course, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed. So let's come on to the Afghan inquiry and the recent revelations about the activities of former Secretary of State for War, Ben Wallace.
Yes, there are too many strands really to this story to be able to encapsulate them in a short news segment. So we'll deal with the most significant parts of it. And we start with a message put out by a rather huffy Ben Wallace, the former Secretary of State for Defence. It does appear in a way that it's a bit of a back-scratching exercise between he and the BBC. He accuses Panorama of trying to subvert an inquiry that he had set up and that he was due to attend on Monday. So he accuses Hannah O'Grady, a producer at Panorama, of effectively stirring by asking questions that he described rather strangely as being leading and inaccurate. I don't know how a question itself can be inaccurate, but nonetheless, he said that they were straight out of a conspiracy. And he went on to say that he wouldn't be effectively talking about such thing until he'd given evidence at the inquiry, which he did on Monday. So effectively, we should stand by for answers to Panorama. But what this goes back to are the allegations made against members of UK Special Forces, in particular the Special Air Service 22 SAS. And we see an example. I mean, there were many, but in particular, the Mail carried a story back in 2017, having spoken to somebody that claimed to have been in the SAS, no longer serving, about the policy, really, which was shoot to kill or capture, shoot to kill being the first part of the policy. And as I say, there are many different areas that we could go into. But I think to give an impression of the sense of wheels within wheels, I should just refer you to Lord Lancaster, Mark Lancaster, who answered a question in Parliament in 2017, because, of course, this was being investigated by the Royal Military Police, the RMP, under the banner of Op Northmore. And when Lancaster was asked then about Northmore and why it was being shut down by two separate MPs, his answer was that it would be absolutely beyond the control of a minister to interfere in such an investigation, which just goes to show that, of course, such interference may be conducted as long as it suits the particular minister in question. I should also point out that Lancaster himself is a serving Major General in the reserve as a Royal Engineer, and also, interestingly, up until the summer of 2020, he was Deputy Commander of 77 Brigade, which, of course, was acting very much against the best interests of the British people during the first lockdowns in the UK. But what this goes back to, or at least brings us forward to, perhaps, is the Overseas Operations Act of 2021, which was sponsored by Ben Wallace in his capacity as Minister for Defence at the time. And this then, the bill said that it was to make provision about legal proceedings and consideration of derogation from the European Convention on Human Rights in connection with operations of the armed forces outside the British Islands. Now, you may have heard of Wallace talking about this. It's more likely you will have heard Johnny Mercer, who spent a lot of time as Minister for the Armed Forces, or Veterans Affairs, talking about essentially vexatious claims. And this was legislation in order to be able to put British servicemen outside of spurious claims being made overseas. Now, the question at hand is what Wallace knew at the time of introducing and indeed amending this bill to reduce the length of time beyond which vexatious or other claims couldn't be made, and how much he knew about allegations made against British Special Forces, and whether or not he is being honest about this. Now, there is more than a whiff of dishonesty in the air, which is evidenced by an exchange between Stuart MacDonald of the SNP and the Ministry of Defence, which he tweeted out in the summer of this year. And he was given initially an answer, followed by another answer, which was described as being the correct one. And effectively, it was to do with whether or not Afghans could be brought back into the UK with the chance of testifying at an inquiry that would shed light on whether or not the Special Forces were involved in any of the things that they've been alleged to have done. And the text that he was sent said this was determined following an internal review that highlighted instances of inconsistent application of the ARAP criteria to a tranche of applications from applicants with links to former Afghan Specialist Unit. Now, that's the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy. And although that's complete gobbledygook, what it means is that, yes, it was possible for UK Special Forces to prevent Afghan Special Forces from coming back and being put in a position where they might be able to, in effect, testify against them. And this takes us to the independent inquiry relating to Afghanistan, which Wallace himself has set up and testified to on Monday. I should just point out that as part of his evidence, there was a restriction order on a 15-minute period of it, which said that there may be no publication, dissemination, disclosure, or repetition of anything that was said or done during a 15-minute period of him speaking. Now, as I say, I referred earlier to Johnny Mercer, and actually it's Mercer's testimony, really, that is more significant at this point. He was asked back in February of this year when he was testifying by Glasgow, who was questioning him, and was there a sense that you were being hung out to dry here? And Mercer said no. There was a sense that I was being gamed the entire time. Now, what he means by that is that he, in his position as Minister for Veterans Affairs, he was very closely involved with this legislation as it was being pushed through. And he was being led to believe that there was no substance to the allegations about members of UK Special Forces. But Mercer's position was that he wanted to see all the evidence that there was to suggest that these things had happened in order that he could be clear that this legislation should go ahead and wasn't going to protect people that shouldn't be protected. And he subsequently said that he thinks he was lied to by Director Special Forces, DSF, and the Chief of the General Staff, the head of the army. He stopped short of calling Wallace a liar, but he did say that Wallace was giving his opinion, which he believed was wrong. So he thinks that Wallace was incompetent as opposed to willfully dishonest. So there is a lot to this. There's a lot more to come out. And I'll just round off by looking quickly at the rules of engagement in the joint services publication which deals with this, which is JSP 398. And just a reminder, really, because this is what this concerns, as to how enemy combatants are dealt with. And it says ROA rules of engagement are one of the key means by which political control is exercised over the use of force and of ensuring that action taken by UK armed forces is lawful. And it goes on to clarify that strategic intent at governmental level, coupled with a legal basis for the offensive use of force, will govern the nature of rules of engagement, and goes on to talk about the Chief of the Defence Staff clarifying this through operational directives. So there's an awful lot to this. There's an awful lot more to come out. But effectively, what it is looking like, and this is unlikely to be batted away by the evidence that Wallace did give on Monday, is that this has caught a lot of people in an enormous lie. And it just remains to be seen whether or not, like every other inquiry that we could really bring to mind, this will also be a whitewash. So I will continue to dig into this and report back as necessary.
Charles, thank you very much for that. Now, okay, if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, please go to support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us there. You could make a donation. Now, I'd just like to make the point that one or two people have been making donations thinking that that was joining as a member. In fact, it's not. You need to scroll on down a little bit and choose which membership level you need. So if you need to if you've done that and you need to change the situation, get in touch. You could support us through the UK Column shop, or you could pick some supplements up from clive2carl.com, and we are an affiliate there, so that helps us as well. So thank you very much to everybody that does help us. We do need your support. Now, we have added the Telegram button to the share buttons on the articles and so on. So please share material you find on the various platforms. And of course, if you're a member, you can get access and make comments on the material that we post on the UK Column website. Now, Piers Robinson, Dr. Piers Robinson has published an article on the latest attacks on academic freedom from the Times and the links to MI6. Vanessa, you've obviously been subject to some of these attacks. I don't know if you've got any brief thoughts on this.
No, it's well worth reading just to understand how the media complex is triggered by the security agencies or intelligence agencies to effectively discredit, smear, and disappear the evidence provided by academics, journalists who are challenging power rather than working for power.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Now, at the weekend, Brian was invited to chair a discussion between Scott Ritter and the Major General Bakshi, from a former Indian Army combat veteran, ex-directorate of military operations in India, and close links to the Indian government. And so that is being streamed out at 1 p.m. Tomorrow. If you are able to watch that, please do watch it and please share it. And Charles, then you have spoken recently to Lord Deben, and well, we've got a little clip, so maybe you could introduce that.
I have, yes. Deben, in fact, named after the river in Suffolk. Yes, not perhaps the typical UK Column interviewee, but nonetheless, he has strong views on extradition, having known Mike Lynch personally. He's also recently stood down as the chairman of the Climate Change Committee. It's a short interview, it's in just over half an hour. I really would encourage you to listen because he talks about corporate influence, and the ending of the interview is somewhat ironic. But here he is on extradition.
Because the Americans are already using their power to get advantage commercially. What they do is to threaten things like this so that people are afraid not to do what they want. They use it to extend American commercial interests. America pretends to be the great free enterprise economy, but of course it is one of the most protectionist economies there are.
And there's some spectacular commentary at the end of that video, so I do encourage everybody to watch it. Now, Bristol, of course, we've got a new name for that, Charles. Rachel Matthews.
We have, yes. Very pleased to be putting Rachel Matthews onto the roster. She will be well known to the UK column audience, having pushed forward significantly with Colchester Council Watch and setting the example in tackling local authorities head on and also corralling people who've sort of had similar experiences. So she's an absolute font of information, not just on knowing how the system works, but also how to push against it and make real progress. So we're delighted that she will be joining us on the 19th of October.
Fantastic. If you haven't got your tickets, please get them at the UK Column shop. And just want to very briefly mention the Heritage Party conference on Saturday. I unfortunately now can no longer attend because I've got to go to a funeral. But Charles, you're going to take my place.
Yes, I'll be talking about free speech, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And I hope that there'll be many of the audience represented. But yes, Brian and I will be there. And it should be a fantastic event. So please do come along or tune in.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Now let's move on to biosecurity.
Yes. Now this has been a theme for many a month, but it's very much ramping up. And of course, as autumn falls upon us, there is the suggestion for not just humans, but also animals that infectious diseases are on the rise. And we have the Animal and Plant Health Agency sort of at the epicenter of this, really, putting out a tweet that's been forwarded by the chief vet, Christine Middlemiss, with her little Ukraine flag, which has nothing to do with veterinary science. But they're talking about veterinary surveillance news, so giving the impression that they're keeping very close tabs on everything that's happening across the United Kingdom landscape. And indeed, that does seem to be the case, at least as far as the internet's concerned. You can now go to a website and pick your chosen disease and find out what it's affecting, where and how. And this is being reinforced by ministers from DEFRA, hand in glove, of course, with the NFU, the National Farmers Union, as per always. Now, I think the particular situation does bear closer scrutiny in terms of the detail. Middlemiss, that I've just referred to, has tweeted just last week that Blue Tongue 3 is spreading across Europe. I have confirmed the virus in one animal imported with other cattle which are negative to Devon. This animal has been culled and the others will be repeat tested. This is our standard post-import practice. Now, I've pulled out what I think is the most significant clause there, which is the others will be repeat tested. It's like leaving the European Union. If you get the wrong result, you just do it again. And of course, the alarming thing is the powers to cull what could be perfectly healthy animals. And this is the time to pull out the old adage, which of course is that the PCR test, according to its designer, its inventor, Carrie Mullis, may not be used as a diagnostic tool. It cannot predict whether or not something will be ill. It does not provide evidence of a virus, and it certainly may not tell you whether one organism will make another organism ill. Nonetheless, it is exactly what APHA hang almost everything they own off. They also describe themselves as being working to safeguard animal and plant health for the benefit of people, the environment, and the economy. But most tellingly, in their priorities for 2025, leading up to 2025, they are protecting the UK by introducing the new border target operating model, which essentially is to do with movement of plants and animals across borders, and protecting the UK from animal and plant-related threats to human health. Now, I spoke about this most recently on the 29th of May on the news, and I sent a Freedom of Information request into APHA specifically to do with expanding nitrogen foam and methods for the mass culling of poultry. I asked them a number of questions, and I'll just pick out some of the answers that they gave me. Essentially, what are they going to do if there is to be a mass depopulation exercise of poultry? They say they have upgraded, and they've got 12 new Mark III containerized gassing units stored across APHA depots, capable of being deployed across England, Scotland and Wales. They've also enhanced their training to include the newer culling methods like using nitrogen foam, whole house gassing, and also alternative methods for fertilized egg destruction. So they are going about it absolutely wholesale. Indeed, even increasing the number of authorized firearms officers up from 5 to 13 in response to the demand for culling infected game birds in release pens. So there's a lot to be digested. But I think given the way we're being pushed as humans, as I say, and this constant suggestion that zoonoses mean that any animal getting ill presents a risk to humans getting ill, I think the most significant part that they gave me in their answer on the Freedom of Information request was concerning vaccinations for humans, because they say that APHA employees do not require any inoculations or vaccinations to undertake avian influenza work. Now, I think that would be one to cut out and keep in the scrapbook for such time as it becomes effectively more being pushed into our lives, specifically with regard to human health. And I've just got a video that shows the direction that I think we're going in, because this was when Catherine Middlemiss herself Christine Middlemiss was working in New South Wales, Australia, and this was the legislation that came in with the emphasis on collective responsibility. So let's have a quick look at this.
Produce and safe food. Biosecurity can often be taken for granted, but it's so important to maintain our $12 billion primary industry sector, strong international reputation and lifestyle that is the envy of many. In New South Wales, we are improving how we manage our biosecurity with a new Biosecurity Act. This new piece of legislation brings together 14 separate acts and introduces the concept of shared responsibility through the General Biosecurity Duty. The General Biosecurity Duty recognises that everyone has a role to play in protecting our state from biosecurity risks. The Act provides a modern and flexible framework to manage risks and support business. And we need your input before it comes into effect in 2017. We now need to develop the regulations and policies that will spell out what you and government need to do to share the responsibility in managing biosecurity risks.
So as you see, shared responsibility at its core, and that is really what the biosecurity state is built around. Now, you might be wondering, why is it that this gets to go ahead at all? And it's because there are compensation scales. So DEFRA putting out information with APHA about what poultry farmers in particular can get. And they say that government has powers to cull in order to control the spread of diseases. And for bird flu and Newcastle disease, you'll get compensation for any healthy birds that are culled by government. So I think the big question that falls out of that is, why are farmers consenting to have animals tested when they should know that the test is not worth the paper it is not even written on? And indeed, there is no mechanism by which illness can be discerned in these creatures. So effectively, they are trying to deny, at the same time as offering compensation, that very compensation. There's a lot more to come out on this as we go into autumn and winter.
Charles, thank you. Now let's come on to censorship. The news from Pavel Durov is that, Telegram is going to start cooperating with the authorities. This is following his arrest. He was, of course, arrested by the French a couple of weeks ago. And he's announced on his Telegram channel that IP addresses and phone numbers of those who violate our rules will be disclosed to relevant authorities in response to valid legal requests. And of course, in the past, Telegram had refused to do this. He also said that the search function on Telegram, which allows people to, of course, find public channels and so on, is going to be much more censored than it has been in the past, because he's worried about what he described as problematic content and unsafe or illegal content and so on. Now, people have been commenting on this, and Mike Eden was pushing this article around from Substack from Anthony Colpo, entitled "The Telegram Sham. Pavel Durov is a World Economic Forum young global leader, and his encrypted messaging app stinks like a psyop." Well, there are many points in this that there's nothing incorrect in this article at all. I would just make the point that, of course, we shouldn't be looking at these apps as being safe in any way. We shouldn't be looking at any of these great tech leaders as being a safe pair of hands for us to store our messaging in. We should treat all of these with immense skepticism. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we absolutely should be doing things in the open, in my opinion, and not hiding behind attempts at anonymity. So perhaps it doesn't really matter to what degree these people are working with the state, because we should use the facilities that are available to us in the full knowledge that that's the case. The same goes for X. X, of course, had been taking a stand in Brazil because the Brazilians were attempting to force Twitter to close accounts that the Brazilians accused of creating disinformation. Elon Musk was taking a stand against that. He has now capitulated because basically the danger, he was forced to close X's office in Brazil because of the danger of arrest of X's employees. So he shut X down in Brazil completely, which cut off 20 million people. But he switched it all back on again. So that's good news, isn't it? Now, I just want to briefly mention a little bit about what's going on in Germany. And so we'll do a quick translation of this headline here. Citizens Council Forum Against Fakes hands over reports to Federal Minister Pfizer. I haven't pronounced that right. Alex will be smacking me around the back of the head when he sees me in October. But anyway, expert reports are the result of a citizen participation project with recommendations for action on how to deal with disinformation. So this is censorship related, but it's also related to sortition, which we've been covering heavily in the last number of weeks. So what were they up to here? They said the German government should consider whether criminal prosecution or other types of penalties are possible based on the definition of disinformation. But they said that preserving freedom of speech is important to us. Of course it is. Nevertheless, the creation and dissemination of disinformation has to be deterred and the perpetrator's sense of wrongdoing heightened. And then they went on to recommend that the European version of the Online Safety Act, or this is part of their legislation equivalent to the Online Safety Act, the Digital Services Act, that this should be extended to force very large online platforms to reserve 1% of their entire global turnover for the purpose of combating disinformation. So, this, as I say, is sortition. So let's just have a look at what is a citizens' assembly in Germany. This page gives an idea of it. It's in English. And they say the citizens' assembly is one of the three pillars of the permanent citizens' dialogue in the German-speaking community. The other two are the Citizens' Council and the Permanent Secretary. The Citizens' Assembly is composed of about 30 members, and these citizens are chosen by lot, so it's a lottery. Now, who's allowed to participate? People who are registered in the population and people who are at least 16 years of old. So quite young people are entitled to take part in this. The Citizens' Assembly is mandated by the Citizens' Council to deal with a particular topic. The members of the Citizens' Assembly first look into the topics and listen to experts. Who chooses these experts? This is the question on the matter. Then they discuss what recommendations should be made to politicians. As a result, the Citizens' Assembly makes recommendations to the Parliament and the government of the German-speaking community. In all decisions, the Citizens' Assembly is supported by the Permanent Secretary. The Permanent Secretary is a staff member from the parliamentary administration. So this demonstrates one of the dangers of these so-called citizens' assemblies. We will be reporting much more on this in the coming days as this gets rolled out in the UK as well. And then to just want to mention the issue of devolution, because the government has announced what they're describing as the first step of their major ambition to drive forward their devolution revolution to ensure that we empower more communities and strengthen the existing powers of our brilliant mayors. This is Angela Rayner was tweeting this out. And so they said that government will prioritise remaining northern areas in the next wave of devolution deals, progression for deals covering Lancashire, Greater Lincolnshire, Hull and East Yorkshire, and Devon and Torbay have been announced, and that they are backing these devolution deals. This is continuing from the announcement of the English devolution bill announced in the King's Speech, and establishing the Council of the Nations and Regions with more details to be announced in due course. And I'm just going to say, if you haven't got a copy of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands yet, please pick up a copy, or maybe pick up a copy for somebody else, because if you want to understand what this devolution agenda is all about, it's all in that report. And we think that this is a really important report that needs to be shared as far and wide as we possibly can. Now, Charles, let's come back to you and back to arms sales.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, something we've talked about quite a bit before, but brought into focus really by the sort of inconsistency in the government's position, speaking out about people in Lebanon, British citizens in Lebanon, needing to get out, and indeed deploying soldiers to Cyprus with the specific possibility of evacuating them, as opposed to considering that actually suing for peace and ceasing arming the Israelis might be a better course of action. So what I thought we'd look at is the sort of the two-way traffic in effect. And I just start with a picture from the Rafael Defense website. You might think they were advertising teddy bears or something, but no, in actual fact, they are in the business of making weapon systems to kill human beings, despite the fact that was a soldier hugging two young children. It was founded in 1948 as part of the military science corps of the IDF. And I just want to give an insight into how arms fairs work. I thought I'd show David Shoebridge, an Australian senator, here, a short video from an arms fair in Melbourne recently.
I'm down here in Melbourne, having literally just stepped out of Land Forces 2024, which is an extraordinarily dystopian festival of largely multinational arms manufacturers. And it's football field after football field after football field of exhibition space in the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, with arms manufacturers from the United States, the UK, Europe, Israel, all trying to get billions and billions of dollars more from Australian taxpayers. Because when you're in that space and you see all the highly paid execs, all the pamphlets, all the free food, every single dollar comes from the public. It's an extraordinary dystopian place to be. It was particularly disturbing to see multiple Israeli arms manufacturers there selling their products, saying that they had been battle tested literally in Gaza. That's their sales pitch. It's a pitch our government should be rejecting. But instead, the Albanese government is doubling down on it. And if you really want to know about dystopian, the whole place is run by a so-called charity, and it's tax deductible.
Well, David Lammy can say what he likes about empire building, but I think, although Shoebridge is Australian, I think he could speak well for the United Kingdom. And the reason I cited Rafael, of course, is they are an Israeli defence company, and we're not so much talking about sales of arms to Israel by the United Kingdom, but the other way around, the production of Israeli weapon systems that are used by the British Army. So I've talked about some of these before, but we've got first an automated vehicle for what's called a last mile capability, and this is Project Theseus. So Rafael's been awarded a $3 million contract. It's also worth pointing out that Horiba Mira, there cited, also have very close relations with Israeli companies. Further, we've got the Challenger 3 missile protection system, which actually was the trophy thing we saw advertised at first, trophy active protection system, to go on to Challenger 3 to provide enhanced protection against rocket and missile threats, basically to counter fire before being hit. And then another one, which is here by Royal Engineers Sky Sabre there. But critically, the interesting part is the brain here, supplied by Rafael, talking about the surface-to-air missile center command and control system, and that it links the tactical data link that allows Sky Sabre to communicate with the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force ships and aircraft, as well as UK allies. Now, specifically, the reason I refer to this now, of course, is with what happened last week in mind. Vanessa reported in very great detail about the attack on Hamas and the use of electronic devices, effectively communication systems, pagers and walkie-talkies, and think that the MOD has gone wholesale in with not just one, but many Israeli defense companies who, of course, do retain the overall intellectual property of all the technology they're designing and putting into our systems. So is that a sensible thing to be doing, is my question. The House of Commons provides the detail on how significant the arms trade is to Israel, because of course there was a hoo-ha recently about the prevention of certain sales, but they say that during the current Hamas-Israel conflict, some MPs have raised concerns about UK arms exports, citing that they could be used to violate international humanitarian law. And they go on to say that, They will not grant a license if it determines that there is a clear risk that the items might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Well, that seems to have been stretched to the absolute limit. But nonetheless, they did grant 42 million's worth in 2022, which it said is less than 1% of Israel's defence imports. That dropped to 18 million in 2023. So whilst it might be fair to say that the United Kingdom has less of an input into Israel arms sales, of course, we are taking a lot from them. But we'll just have a quick look at the fact sheet from SIPRI, the complete acronym I forget, but it's the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, and they've put forward an updated report on the trends across worldwide arms sales. So what's very significant given the geopolitical situation, and I would say with specific regard to Ukraine and Israel, exports from the United States have gone up by 17%, which takes their global share from 34% to 42% of all worldwide arms exports. They provide 69% of Israel's arms. Germany provides 30% of those. Russia's exports are down 53%, which of course we talked about before, and there's a very obvious reason for that. And Ukraine's imports are now equal to 23% of all those across Europe, which is very significant. The graphic illustration of this shows the chart, the enormous section on the right being the United States. France is the second largest seller of arms across the world, and then we've got the UK and Israel still in the top 10. So this is how things lie. But I think really the main question is, what on earth does the Ministry of Defence think it's doing, first of all, in not suing for peace in any of these countries, but specifically bringing Israeli technology into weapon systems and indeed control systems for United Kingdom weapons? It seems to make absolutely no sense at all.
Thank you, Charles. Just a quick correction. You said Hamas with respect to the pagers and whatnot. Of course, that was Hezbollah, which brings us on to the final segment, Vanessa, and that is to take a look at Hezbollah, because quite a lot of, shall we say, misinformation about Hezbollah in the mainstream press in the West.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, the mainstream media, as I'll demonstrate, is simply channeling the Israeli line on Hezbollah. And I know Charles has received a question in the past related to Hezbollah. So I just thought, it's a good moment perhaps to give a little bit of an explainer. And of course, if people want to ask more questions, they can join extra. So first of all, let's just play a video message from Netanyahu to the Lebanese people.
I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you. It's with Hezbollah. For too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. It placed rockets in your living rooms and missiles in your garage. Those rockets and missiles are aimed directly at our cities, directly at our citizens. To defend our people against Hezbollah strikes, we must take out those weapons. Now, starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Don't let Hezbollah endanger your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Don't let Hezbollah endanger Lebanon. Please, get out of harm's way now. Once our operation is finished, you can come back safely to your homes.
Well, except, of course, the homes will be destroyed. And of course, there is no mention of the threat of Israel and its allies to the region. So anyway, let's have a look at the BBC, who a couple of days ago put out this article, What is Hezbollah in Lebanon? And will it go to war with Israel? What is Hezbollah and where does it operate? So, of course, what does the BBC do? It channels the Israeli description of Hezbollah, that it's effectively created by Iran. It's an Iranian proxy, it's dominant Shia, so in other words, it's a sectarian organization. Let's have a look again. I'm taking much of this information from Western think tanks, so I'm not looking at let's say, Hezbollah-aligned or sympathetic media in many cases. This is basically a map showing in a very reductionist way, the influence of Hezbollah in the south, going up towards the east with the border with Syria and Israel, and also, of course, in the capital city of Beirut. Let's have a look at when Hezbollah was founded. They were founded, this is just one of many commentators on X. They were founded, of course, after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and siege of Beirut in 1982. 10 young men met in a mosque in the random suburbs of Beirut and pledged to resist Israeli invaders until martyrdom. The name's well known, and of course she mentions Fuad Ali Shukr, who was assassinated by Israel back in July. And of course, in 1982, we should all remember the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, which was one of, although it wasn't directly carried out by the Zionists, it was carried out by their proxies in the Phalange Christians militia, one of the worst massacres in the history of massacres by the Zionist entity. If people want to read more about it, I do recommend Robert Fisk, who was actually there during or came just after the massacre. And then I wanted to have a look at this article by Sharmeen Nawani, who's Lebanon-based, reported from Syria from 2012 onwards. So she says, for Lebanon, Hezbollah is more than just the first Arab force to militarily expel the Israeli Defense Forces from its territory permanently. Of course, that was in 2006. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is a political party too, with members of parliament and seats in the cabinet. In 2022, the Hezbollah alliance won 13 seats out of 128 seats. And in fact, it lost a narrow majority that it had had for many years before then. The group runs a remarkable array of social services across the country, from subsidized schools, hospitals and clinics to agricultural centers and environmental programs. And those are basically open to all denominations inside Lebanon. Furthermore, Hezbollah's appeal is not limited, as I said, to Lebanon's Shia community, which of course is what Israel wants you to believe, and the BBC. Since 2006, Hezbollah has been in political alliance with the country's largest Christian-based political party, the Free Patriotic Movement, whose leader, General Michel Aoun, is currently president of Lebanon. Aoun's close association with Hezbollah is an irritant to Washington, and the Trump administration is pushing, so this was written back under Trump's presidency, to tighten the sanctions noose on Lebanon as well as on Syria. In September, the House of Representatives voted to strengthen the 2015 Hezbollah international financing prevention. Now I just want to play, because I want to go on to the idea of Hezbollah being a proscribed organization, both in the UK and in the US. So in the US from 1997 and the UK, I think, from 2001. So this was a closed session, secret recording of John Kerry's conversation with the White Helmets at the UN and other so-called opposition representatives. So let's just have a listen. You have to listen quite carefully because the quality is not good, but I will provide a transcript to what he says specifically about Hezbollah.
The reason for that is that they have both basically declared war on us and are plotting against us, and Hezbollah is not plotting against us. Hezbollah is exclusively focused on Israel, whom they're not attacking now, and on Syria, where they are attacking in support of Assad. So it's
No, I entirely understand your position as representing the American interest, because these Shia groups, they do not attack the United States, of course. But how to make the majority of the Syrian people accept this approach?
I'm sorry, what?
How to make the Syrian people accept this argument that because Hezbollah or Fadl Abbas, the Iraqi and the Iranian groups are not fighting the United States now, so they are not targeted by the attacks against terrorism in Syria. They kill Syrians.
They are targeted by the opposition. We are arming. So, and training.
I do recommend listening to this entire recording, because there what he effectively admits is that Hezbollah is not opposed to the United States. It is effectively created to oppose Israel. And Hezbollah are being targeted by the Syrian opposition, the terrorist forces, who the US is arming and training. Again, you can freeze frame the transcript and read it at your leisure, but let's continue with the idea of Hezbollah carrying out terrorist attacks on the next slide, please, Mike, even.
That one?
No, sorry, no,
yeah.
back
okay.
one.
Okay,
yeah. So you asked me, Mike, yesterday about whether Hezbollah has carried out terrorist attacks against the US or the UK or the EU. Charmaine does actually cover this, and as she actually says, the evidence of this is extremely slim and is peppered with more use of qualifying terms, allegedly, reportedly, assessments, linkages, than any objective journalist can comfortably swallow. So, too, are the US reports of Hezbollah's international terrorist activities. Reporter Gareth Porter has done deep dives on various allegations of Hezbollah-linked terrorism in Argentina, Bulgaria, Washington, D.C., India, and Saudi Arabia. So the link to that article with the links to Gareth Porter's work obviously will be in the notes at the end of the news. And again, coming back to this non-sectarian concept, this is in International Business Times. Christian, Sunni and Shia meet Hezbollah's non-denominational military branch defending Lebanon, fighting in Syria. So what do they say about that? The Sunni Muslims are not the only ones to join up with Hezbollah. Christians and non-practicing Shiites who subscribe to Hezbollah's brand of violent resistance can also join the non-denominational brigade. Suraya al-Muqawama is made for non-extremist people, said Sami Ramadan, a Sunni recruiter for the group. So again, very much like the Iraqi resistance factions, they are non-sectarian, they are inclusive of all religious denominations. Now in Syria, and this is where it becomes very important, not only in Syria, also in Lebanon, Hezbollah was responsible for not only liberating vast swathes of territory from the various terrorist factions backed by Israel and the West, but also in particular the Christian communities in Aleppo, in Hama on the border with Idlib, in and around Damascus and in the Damascus countryside. And I wanted to just play clips from two videos demonstrating the strength of feeling and solidarity from those Syrian Christians towards Hezbollah. So the first one is from an area called Bludan, which is in the countryside of Damascus.
كل نقطة دم تنزل من هالشهداء من شهداء حزب الله حسرة بتحرقنا، لأنه عم يستشهدوا على أرض مش أرضهم، وبس اللي كان بيجمعهم الوفا، يعني إنه هن كانوا أوفياء إلنا، يعني بيحبونا، يعني في شيء بيجبرهم غير المحبة إلنا.
ونحن ما بننكر فضله إلا بعد الممات، لأنه اللي عملوا حزب الله مع أهل بلودان ومع المنطقة كلها وبسوريا كلها.
And the second clip is also from the Damascus countryside to the north at a little monastery of St. James the Mutilated in Kara, and this is from 2013.
De ver eso, como primero es Dios a quien agradecemos, así que la impresión que tengo de Hezbollah es verdaderamente como ángeles que están para servir a Dios y a cada uno de las personas de forma gratuita. Yo creo que no tengo otra palabra para expresar en relación a ellos, sino que son como ángeles, mitel malaike.
The negative image I got from Europe in general was completely changed when I had contact with the reality of the Hezbollah who defended us. And so that convinced me not only by their words but especially by their acts and also the lovely manner they were between us.
And I have to say, from a personal experience in multiple Syrian Christian communities across Syria, I've had contact with the Hezbollah fighters that were defending and protecting those areas from the UK, US cartel and Israeli, of course, backed terrorist factions, and they always conducted themselves with tremendous courtesy towards those communities. Extraordinary people, extraordinary protection of all denominational communities in Syria and in Lebanon.
Thank you, Vanessa. And the key point here is this is clearly a much more nuanced organisation than the Western media would like to portray.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for Charles as well. Thanks to everybody that watched today, but we are over time, so we've got to leave it there. We will be back in a few minutes if you're a UK Column member for some extra. Plenty to discuss today. Hope to see you there. Otherwise, enjoy the discussion tomorrow at 1 p.m. And we'll see you on Friday, as usual, at 1 p.m. for another news programme. See you then. Bye-bye.